Welcome! I'm John Denor, and this is Goblin Points. This episode, I have the pleasure of having Solace on. You might know their name as one of the first people to publish homebrew for Drawsteel once the creator license dropped. What they published was actually the first published adventure made for Drawsteel. Without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Welcome to Goblin Point, Solace.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Give us a short introduction and tell us a bit about how you ended up in the MCDM community.
Yeah, I am Queen Solace. I use they, them pronouns. I go by Queen or Q or Solace. Any of those are fine for me. I ended up in the MCDM community just by about 7 or 8 years ago. Wow, that's a long time. 7 or 8 years ago, I was trying to start GMing. I'd heard of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, this sounds interesting. I'd like to do this with my friends. So I went to where everyone sort of starts their DMing journey. I went and I got a Dungeon Master's Guide, and I was like, the best way to learn is to read the manual from start to finish. So I was just like sitting there, like reading about all the multiverses I was supposed to create, and like like exact population breakdown of like different types of towns. And I was like, oh no, this isn't going to work. So I turned to YouTube. I watched a bunch of videos and eventually stumbled into Matt Colville's and started following through that way. And then as things sort of took off with the Strongholds and Followers Kickstarter, like I was there for the first episode of The Chain, sort of stuck through all the way to now.
Wow. You jumped on pretty early then.
Yeah. It's a long time ago.
I have to ask, I've seen you've been at least quite interested in Drawsteel. Have you participated in playtesting too?
Not the contract testing, but with the Patreon packets and the backup packets have been playtesting quite a bit. I think I'm at nearly a dozen sessions at this point, mix of GMing and playing. So yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
I think I first made note of you when they released the creator's license, and almost immediately we're talking minutes here. You were on the ball and you published an adventure, which surprised me. Sure, a kit. That's not that's very surmountable. But you were ready with a complete adventure immediately.
Yeah, surprised us too.
Can you tell us a bit about the adventure itself, and also how it came to be that you ended up making an adventure right out of the gate?
Yeah. The adventure is The Wrath of the Iresouls. It is I think it's sort of a very like modular adventure in that it just takes place in this town that has a bunch of these ancient elemental artifacts that no one really understands, but knows how to use to make their lives better. And all of a sudden, things start going wrong with them. They're like flaring with fire or like overgrowing the area with vines and things like that. And then the heroes sort of come in and have to sort of neutralize each of these artifacts and take on some of that elemental power temporarily before facing down the villain who is overall in charge of that. The way that sort of started was, I think I always knew I'd want to make stuff for Drawsteel. In the past, we've made some 5e things, my co-author and I. I love designing, I love homebrew, all that sort of thing. So I was excited to do it when Drawsteel released. One of the first things where the sort of idea originated was just sort of thinking about, we have these like 5e projects. Like at some point, I think it would maybe be fun to port them to Drawsteel when that is a reasonable thing to do. So I was sort of going through and was like, okay, we have these astral methods. And I was looking at those and I was like, I think methods are sort of tied to this sort of narrative space of the Seattle company at this point in time. So I was like, what is our version of that? What is our spin on that? I sort of, when thinking, came up with like elementals that are sort of fueled by emotion, fueled by the emotion of a soul. So that's where the Iresouls came from. And then I sort of talked to my co-author about this, and we started brainstorming like, oh, what are different Iresouls? What's sort of that emotion that's sort of fueling them? The verdant Iresoul, who's associated with the element of green, as we all know, Drawsteel has 7 different elements. And one of them is green. So like, what is green? It is like dying while you are trying to like achieve something ambitious. What is the like Earth Iresoul? What's their emotion? It's like dying while like being stuck in your ways, being sort of stalwart. And then from that, we sort of began to think about like, okay, what would an adventure with these guys look like? Knowing that it would be a like lower level adventure, not something that like it's not going to be a 10th level adventure out of the gate. Just to sort of give us time to like experiment, play with the system. And I think you see quite a bit of that in Wrath of the Iresouls. And that a lot of it is just us trying to figure out like what works for combats and objectives in Drawsteel and how all of that comes into play. What I've sort of experienced is that designing tactical encounters very much differs in the system you're in. It's not just necessarily a one-size-fits-all, like have a lot of movement or have like these different like terrain objects you can interact with. Because in some systems, some of those aspects will be more or less rewarding than the others. So we were sort of trying to strike that balance in the MCDM RPG, Drawsteel.
Have you found it difficult to make interesting combat in Drawsteel compared to like something like 5e or other systems?
Yeah, I think that it is, in my experience, way easier in Drawsteel. Like, obviously, that is one of the design goals of the system. So obviously, it's going to play in rather significantly there. There is a lot of movement in Drawsteel, as we all know. There's a lot of forced movement, so there's a lot of ways that those can factor in even. And the sort of what I have found personally is that the power roll is very inspiring, just for terrain objects, for interacting with them, for all sorts of things there. And like definitely there is an aspect of like learning what works better in Drawsteel for a terrain object to do than in other systems. For instance, in one of our encounters at the Chime Spire, there is this lightning that is constantly striking down. The sort of goal of that encounter is to get to these 2 bells and ring them a couple times. And in the first iteration of that, the lightning strike would come down, strike someone, you'd make a resistance roll, and depending on the results, you might be slowed afterward. And what we found in playtesting was like that really did not work well with the MCDM RPG when movement is so big. That was really painful, especially with the goal of moving to a place and doing a thing. When you sort of clamp down on movement that hard, especially when you have other things going on, there are enemies, there are other terrain effects, it really, really is debilitating. So we revised it so that every time the lightning strikes you, it deals damage, but you also get faster, and it's cumulatively faster. So like if you're feeling lucky, you can like raise your metal sword to the sky, and just every single turn, lightning's going to be striking you down, but you're going to get faster and faster and faster until the point that you can just zip across the map. Which maybe that's not how lightning works in real life, but it's fun.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting where you went in the complete opposite direction from going from slow to actually speeding them up.
yeah. Because when we playtested, when we were just like designing it, we were like, oh, okay, it's probably going to be pretty easy to just get up to these bells and ring them. So we're going to have to put things in to keep the heroes from being able to do that trivially. But when we playtested it, it was like, oh, you've got to like run a while to get there, and then you've got to climb up. And also there are enemies happening in this whole thing, which made it really difficult to get up and do the objective. So it was like giving you a little bit of an incentive to do the objective while still being a sort of fun and thematic thing that in some ways makes the encounter more difficult because you're taking damage if you want to get that speed boost. But it also makes it easier in that you're faster, you can zip around and get to where you want to be.
Feels like a very enjoyable risk-reward kind of thing where, yeah, you're taking damage, but you're also getting a boost.
Yeah. It's like, oh man, I took 4 damage. That's a not insignificant amount of my stamina. But also, like, my speed increased by 2. Like, if I'm a slow character, I basically just doubled my speed.
You mentioned playtesting. Do you do a lot of playtesting of the adventures you write?
Yeah. We try to do a couple playtest rounds through them with different people just to sort of see how it feels. Like, a lot of these things are things that we wouldn't have caught beforehand. Just like thinking in our little white box room, we like just trying to birth an adventure like Zeus, like Athena from Zeus's mind.
Right.
So definitely playtesting and getting like experience on the ground to see what that actually ends up being in play is super, super valuable. And it's definitely something that we try to do, not only because we think it makes the adventure better, but because we love a good excuse to play some draw steel.
I noticed you published a layout template for Draw Steel for Affinity Publisher. I'm not really familiar with these kind of publisher tools. I assume that Affinity Publisher is akin to what's the Adobe one?
InDesign.
InDesign, yes.
It is like InDesign, but cheaper, as in a one-time payment, and also slightly less featured in some annoying ways.
Okay. You made this layout template, which is based on the design that you used for the adventure, correct?
Yes, yeah. So what happened was after we'd finished the adventure, I just went in and duplicated the adventure and like basically just cut out most of it, but left the templates and stuff and left some instructions and examples of use there. So it's the exact same file that I used for the adventure. Just because I believe Onslaught 6 has also made a great layout template that was looking to emulate the layout preview that we saw with the backer kit release, that layout of the Dragon Knights. I also had been working on this one before that. I wasn't so much focused on sort of emulating the MCDM layout, just since we didn't have it yet. And at this point, it's still sort of prone to being changed. So I just sort of thought about like, oh, what do I think would be helpful for me and other folks running this, and try to put that in there and make it look reasonable and read reasonably and all that sort of stuff.
I also noticed, and I kind of like these, you made some custom character sheets for the first patron packet. What I really like about they were so charming.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can pinpoint the exact thing. I just really liked there was something about the design that just felt very charming to me.
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to make it approachable because I was planning to run for people who I obviously hadn't played the game before. None of us had, and I was like, to like help me understand the rules, but also because I think it's helpful. Like I think at that point we just had. Was it just a Word document for them, or was there some sort of preliminary character sheet layout? I don't know.
I don't remember, actually.
I don't remember.
That's a good question.
Yeah. But either way, I think people are experiencing this now where the character sheet is like it works, it gets the job done, but it doesn't. It isn't super fully featured. And since those were entirely pre-gens, I figured like, okay, we can like put features in here to make them more usable and such. My players have sort of been bugging me to make some for the current version of the rules, some character sheet templates, which I'm sure I will do at some point. I have already made ability cards for them that I haven't released because I want to sort of figure out. Basically, the way it works is that I have an Excel sheet that will automatically add your kit bonuses. And then I need to data merge that into the layout template. And then I can take that PDF. And those are like the ability cards. So I just don't know how to make that happen for other people.
Sure. That is basically all I had in my notes, actually, except for the encounter tracker. I do find it interesting, though, because tracking initiative and tracking encounters is something that I've struggled with as long as I've played D&D 5th edition. it's kind of easier now with Draw Steel. Kind of leading into the encounter tracker that you've made here. What's the decision behind how it's designed? What's the inspiration or the need it tries to solve?
So it sort of started for me when I ran that first Patreon playtest. I ran the Fall of Blackbottom. And for the folks who are not patrons and you only got the backer packet, monsters were a lot more complicated back then.
Yeah.
So I was running this. I ran the Bay of Blackbottom online. So I had on one screen I had the Owlbear Rodeo map filled up, and then on the other screen I had on one side the bestiary, on the other side the rules document just to reference. And then I was like, oh no, I also have to have the adventure pulled up because there are 20 different rooms that are all keyed and have different things happening. And there are also things referenced in those rooms that are 3 pages up, so I'm having to scroll back and forth everywhere. So I just sort of thought there's been talk of doing an encounter sheet for this game. I have also, so sort of to go alongside the encounter tracker, I've also made encounter sheets. There's both encounter trackers and encounter sheets included in Wrath of the Iresouls. I had ones done for the Fall of Blackbottom, but that was before the creator license, so I wasn't able to post them, and I haven't had the chance to update them yet. But I do have the Fall of Blackbottom one, so maybe I should post those. But it sort of, in my mind, is intended to be used beside them, because you have the encounter sheet on one side that has all of your stat blocks, the map, any objectives or villain power things or terrain things. And then on this other side, you have this other sheet that allows you to track stamina and who's acted and what squads are grouped with what captains, a place to track how much villain power you have. And it's also, the encounter tracker is meant, also it has space for you to write in terrain elements or villain power abilities. Sort of the idea being that if you are just running your own campaign, you can write those things in and fill them out and have them available in one spot for you as you're running.
I remember running the Fall of Blackbottom with the backer packet rules, and I I thought I did pretty well until 3 weeks later when I noticed that there was a whole section that I'd completely forgotten about during the whole thing.
No, I ran the Fall of Blackbottom 2 times, I think. And after the first time, I was like, oh, I completely forgot all of these features of the terrain. I'll remember that for next time. And then the next time came around and I completely forgot about it because I was just so sort of overwhelmed tracking everything. My players were like, I'm having a great time. This game is great. This feels super heroic. And I'm back here behind the screen, pulling my hair out, screaming internally because my brain's running on all cylinders trying to keep track of the 8 different villain power abilities and the 3 villain power abilities in each individual stat block and the captain traits attaching to the minion traits.
I just remember thinking Matt and James were talking about how they were going to simplify monsters, especially after going to Gen Con and feeling, and the others on the NCDM team feeling the pain of running, especially without digital tools. And I thought to myself, well, I don't think it was that bad, But then I realized I'd completely forgotten about a lot of things. And so it turns out, well, it was pretty bad because I skipped over so much of the abilities of the monsters and forgot to add villain points at the correct points.
Yeah.
So it's just that I wasn't aware of how much I'd been missing.
Yeah, definitely. The same thing happened to us when we were playtesting Wrath of the Iresouls. Is our first playtest happened. Our playtests were happening before the backer kit released, and we'd go through and we'd be like, "Oh shoot, we forgot all the captain abilities this whole time. We forgot to use some of our the thing we did in villain power back in that version that no one saw was we had sort of faction wide abilities, and then we had specific ones for different elements." And each combat would just be like, okay, these are your 3 villain power abilities you can use. You don't have to keep track of the whole list. And even then, we were getting overwhelmed. So the entire pruning it back on the backer kit worked really well for us.
It was kind of disappointing when they figured they had to kind of scale back, because there were a lot of cool ideas in there with the monsters generating more villain power when kind of doing signature stuff. But on the other hand, it was so much.
Yeah. It was like every turn, it was just like, okay, do I use a special villain power? No? Okay. What action do I use? Okay, does that action help me do the thing that generates me villain power? Yeah. It was intense.
Speaking of draw steal more in general, is there something that they've kind of teased, or maybe something that's already in the rules that you're kind of excited about, get your hands on and get to use in your campaigns in the future?
Yeah. I think that there is definitely quite a lot of stuff that I am sort of raring to use once I finally am GMing a draw steal campaign, or I think soon playing it one. One of the things, it's something I'm already using in my current Pathfinder 2nd edition campaign, is like negotiation. I just think that's a really nice framework as a director, just to sort of like track the progress of a conversation. My Pathfinder campaign has a reasonable amount of like political aspects, like negotiating with leaders of communities and stuff like that. So that's like been really helpful to me. Just as like if it's like I only have a little while to prep the session, just like choose a couple motivations, choose a couple pitfalls, and think about like what they'd give or what they'd want for that. So that's been super helpful for me. I think that I am sort of overall, like I'm just excited to see where the hero classes go. Like we've seen first level, which is already like very heroic, and I'm just interested to see what happens like abilities wise and like scaling wise as things move up. Like I think that's going to be really interesting to watch and really exciting to watch, because I'm hoping to sort of go through the whole campaign level for that in draw steal.
I have to concur that the negotiation rules are really, I've been really fascinated by them ever since they kind of showed up in the rules at all. I think that like social interaction rules are a bit lacking in my experience is mostly in D&D 5th edition, but I get the impression that basically all editions of D&D and its derivatives are very lacking in social kind of role-playing frameworks at all. I found the negotiation rules interesting just because of that, but also the kind of the tweaking they've managed to do over time. And the rules are in a pretty good place now, especially after watching the video of James on the character sheet, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Where he did like just a negotiation, just to show off how it could work. That video should be watched by a lot more people just to see how well the negotiation rules can work when you don't get hung up on, oh, it's a system, so it's too rigid. And then you watch that, and it's very clearly just how you would run a negotiation. It's just that it helps you with a framework so that you don't have as much of a burden on you as a director.
Yeah, definitely. That was a really great watch, and it was like, yes, this is how negotiation should be in this game. Like a lot of my players, when we first did the negotiation, sort of like bounced off it because it was like, oh, we're just like rolling to try to increase numbers before this other number decreases. Yeah, whatever. But then once I sort of like brought those numbers and sort of hid them a little bit, it sort of made it feel a lot more natural and allowed people to be more engaged, because my groups we go into roleplay as well as really enjoying that tactical combat. So not having it be so clearly mechanized really helped folks for that.
Speaking of the level progression, because it seems like from what I've been able to kind of gather from James's streams and whatever, that it seems less like the numbers don't go up as much as they do in, for example, 5th edition, but that it's more about expanding horizontally, where you get more options to do different things more than that you do more damage. And I find that very interesting. In my mind, having played Dungeons and Dragons and I don't know, most video games, the numbers always go up.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting, and I have to admit, somewhat hard to imagine how that will actually look at level 10, for example. What does a level 10 hero in Drostia look like if the numbers don't go up?
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds like there's some amount of going up.
Yeah,
But
sure.
yeah, it definitely sounds like a lot of horizontal progression there. But I'm also wondering, like, already right now, it's pretty easy to get an edge or a double edge on like a test. Presumably, or I don't know for sure, but it seems likely that that would become easier and easier as you level up, as you get more abilities and such. So I just sort of
Yeah.
wonder where that plays with the test, as getting edges becomes easier, like even with just like the assisted test. It's pretty easy to get an edge or double edge on that.
Yeah.
And with your characteristics slowly increasing and being able to get those edges easier, like I just sort of wonder where that sits with tests once you get that far down the line.
Yeah, I find that interesting too. Especially, Matt mentioned recently that they were kind of liberal with awarding edges because they stop at two, so there's no risk of having too many edges in that you don't get insane bonuses. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, already this shadow feels like it has a lot of edges. I don't know if you've seen the wee meme from Tamwin with I don't know what to do with all these edges.
Yeah. No, it's like you're already sort of stacked up at level 1. So it's like, what does that look like when you have 9 more levels, and presumably 9 more levels of things giving you options to get edges like that, and like positioning and all of that sort of thing, when it already feels like very locked in at level 1, and it feels like we're using the full space of those systems already at level 1. But I'm sure the design team has thought about this. I'm sure they have spreadsheeted all of this out already in a way I have not.
I was watching the stream with where they did the playtest, the internal playtest, and they were mentioning that they're kind of experimenting with how heroic resources work for each class, where they get more bespoke ways of both earning resources, but also more bespoke ways of spending them. And
I saw that stream as well.
And they mentioned that the shadow hadn't been updated for the testing the new ways to spend them, but they mentioned that maybe one of the ways that that a shadow generates insight is by attacking with an edge. And I just thought to myself, isn't that all the time?
Yeah.
Are they ever attacking with that one?
Yeah, it seems from what I've seen that the like bonus resource that you get is meant to be pretty much every round. So I think that's probably factored in. But yeah, it is very much like a lot of edges flying around.
Towards the end here, I want to ask you if there is any recommendation you want to give to the people that are listening to this podcast. Something that you think that people should check out.
Yeah, definitely. One of the sort of games I really enjoy is called Star Realms. It is a sort of spaceship deck builder, but importantly, all the cards come in one box. So you have all the cards you need to play. I have long been interested in games like Magic the Gathering, but I've been too scared to get into them just because of the sort of acquisition cost of all of that. So Star Realms is great just in that I get sort of that deck builder feel, and I get it every time, not just like between games. And it's also like in one box, it's very portable. I can take it with me, all that sort of stuff. And then in the world of RPGs, I haven't played this game yet, but I'm excited to at some point, which is Bump in the Dark. It is based on Blades in the Dark. It's the Forged in the Dark system, and it's sort of like Monster of the Week, but a bit more hopeful. So whereas like Blades in the Dark is very much like you're like bad people doing bad things to get rich and make it out for yourself, Bump in the Dark is much more hopeful. It's like you are pillars of a community who are trying to like protect your community from these like weird cryptid attacks. One of the things is that in Blades in the Dark, there are things that I don't remember the exact terms, but they're like indulgences, like things you indulge in, like whether that be like gambling or like substance use or things like that. But in Bump in the Dark, those are like the things that sort of rejuvenate you and that you do to like help your community between like the adventures and stuff. So it's very much like an investigation type game, community building game, which is very fun. There's a second edition that recently released, and I'm super fun to play that. Probably going to play it for a mini campaign at some point in the new year, which is exciting.
Ah, nice. I'll have to check both of those out, because I've also been a bit intimidated by the sheer amount of money you have to spend on magic.
yeah, and it's also like it's been around for decades at this point, so it's like it feels intimidating to jump into. Whereas Star Realms it's just like it's just a little box of cards. You could like read through them if you want, or just see them as they like pop up through play.
Well, thank you for coming on, Solace. It was really fun having you.
yeah. Thanks for having me. It was super fun to be on Goblin Points. Been watching the show since the start. So happy to be here. Happy to be on.
Fantastic, and thank you.
Definitely
for being a faithful listener.
yeah. Always there.
Thank you, Solace, for coming on. Links to Solace's homebrew and Star Realms and Bump in the Dark is linked in the show notes. Do check it all out. If you want to be featured on Goblin Points or know of someone else who should be, leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, or send me an email on tips@goblinpoints.com. Links to the MCDM Discord server, the Reddits for MCDM and Draw Steel, the YouTube channels of Matt and MCDM, the complete link section, and this script is in the show notes. It's also on goblinpoints.com. Next episode is on the 5th. That'll be the roundup episode for the month of October. See you next time. Snakkes.